In this lesson, we're going to be looking at solving equations. I'm sure in your previous algebra courses, you've probably already done some of these. Some of it might be a little bit new, so some of it will probably be a review and other parts will be new. If we look at our guiding question, what are the steps for solving an equation? We will go through that in this video. During the process of solving equations, you form a series of equivalent equations. Each step produces a simpler equivalent equation until you have solved for the given variable. To do this, we use our properties of equality and our inverse operations. Inverse operations are operations that undo each other, such as addition and subtraction, and multiplication and division. If you look in our take note box here, we have the addition and subtraction properties of equality. What they say is that what you do to one side, you do to the other. The addition property of equality says that if you were to add a number, such as C, to one side of the equation, you have to make sure you add it to the other. In the example, we see that we add the 3 to one side, so we must also add the 3 to the other side. The subtraction property of equality says the same thing. If I subtract C from one side of the equation, I have to make sure I subtract it from the other. And in the example, I subtract 3 from one side, so I subtract 3 from the other. Continuing on, the multiplication and division properties of equality work the same way. If I multiply both sides by number C, if I do one side, by number C, I have to do the other side by C. In the example, it shows us multiplying the left side by 3 as well as multiplying the right side by 3. And the same goes for division. If I divide one side by C, I have to divide the other side of the equation by C. In our example, we divide the left by 5, so we divide the right by 5. The solution of an equation is what makes the equation true. And our goal is to isolate the variable, which means to get the variable by itself. We will now go over our steps for solving an equation. Our first step for solving an equation is to clear equation of fractions and or decimals. Our second step is to clear equation of parentheses, which means you would do the distributive property. Our third step is to combine like terms on each side of the equation, which means you'll combine the terms that are on the left together and you'll combine the like terms that are on the right together. Our fourth step is to undo any addition or subtraction. Undo means do the opposite. And the last step is undo any multiplication or division. Now we're going to look at a series of example problems. The problems that have an orange box around them have videos that go along with them. You can access these videos if you open up your textbook and go to that problem and then just touch on the problem number that has the orange around it, and the video will come up. I put page numbers with the problems on your note sheet so you can find them if you need to. Our first problem that we're going to look at is an equation that uses subtraction. I have x plus 13 equals 27. If I look at my steps, there are no fractions or decimals to clear. There are no parentheses. There are no like terms to combine. So I would look to undo any addition or subtraction. Since I have plus 13, I'm going to undo it by subtracting 13 from each side. So I end up with x equals 14. And I can always do a check. The check, you just put the value of x back into the equation. In this case, I put 14 in for the x. And I would see that 14 plus 13 does indeed equal 27. Our next problem is solving an equation using addition, because addition is the inverse operation of subtraction. So I'll look on the same side of my equation that has the variable in it, in this case b, and I do the opposite of minusing 3, which would be plus 3. And if I do it to one side, I also do it to the other. Then I would add negative 7 plus 3, which would be negative 4. Negative 3 plus 3 zeroes out, so I get b equals negative 4. And again, I would check it. Problem 3 involves solving an equation using division. I have 4x equals 6.4. 4x means 4 times x. So since the opposite of multiplying is dividing, instead of multiplying by 4, I would divide both sides by 4. So if I take 6.4 and I divide it by 4, I get 1.6. And again, you could check it. Put 1.6 in for x, multiply it, and you'll see that you do indeed get 6.4. Problem 4, solving an equation using multiplication. I have x divided by 4 equals negative 9. So the opposite of dividing both sides by 4 would mean to multiply both sides by 4. So I'd multiply by 4 here. I'd multiply by 4 here. That allows me to cancel my 4's. So I get x equals negative 36. That was a little sloppy over there. I'll show you, rewrite it over here. Multiply both sides by 4. Anything divided by itself is 1, so the 4's cancel out and I get x equals negative 36. Our next problem involves solving an equation by multiplying by our reciprocal of a fraction. If we have a fraction multiplied by a variable, 4/5 times m equals 28, I can multiply both sides by the reciprocal of 4/5, which would be 5/4. When I do that, those cancel each other out, leaving me with m equals, and then if I multiply 28 times 5/4, I get 35. So m would equal 35. Our next problem is this two-step equation. Again, if I think back to my rules for solving an equation, or my steps for solving an equation, I clear equation of fractions, then I would clear equation of parentheses, then combine like terms on either side of the equal sign. None of those steps apply here, so I would go to step 4, which is undo any addition or subtraction. So since I have the plus 3 on the same side as my x, I would minus 3 on both sides. Then I would have 2x equals 12, and then do my last step. Divide each side by 2, and I would get x equals 6. My next problem involves solving a problem that has two terms in the numerator. I'll rewrite that over here so again we can get a good look at this. This goes with our first step in our equation solving process, clear equation of fractions. When you clear an equation of fractions, you multiply by what would be the common denominator. In this case, we only have one denominator, so our common denominator here would be 3, which means I multiply both sides by 3, which means these cancel each other out. 3 divided by 3 is 1, leaves me with the x minus 7 equals negative 12 times 3, which is negative 36. Which I'd go on to step 4, undo any addition or subtraction. So I'd add the 7 to both sides, and I get x equals negative 29. And again, I could check it by substituting it back into the original problem and checking to see if it works, which it does. Our next example problem is a problem with combining like terms. Following my steps, clear equation of fractions doesn't apply. Clear equation of parentheses doesn't apply. Third step, combine like terms on each side of the equal sign. I just have the one term 5 on the left, so that just comes right on down. And then my like terms on the right are my 5m and my 2m, so I just read them from left to right. 5m plus 2m. So 5m plus 2m would be 7m, and then I have my minus 23. And then I would go to step 4, undo any addition or subtraction. So I'm going to undo my minus 23 by adding 23 to both sides, which gives me 28 equals 7m. So my last step, undo any multiplication or division. 7 times m, I'm going to undo by dividing by 7, and I get m equals 4. Problem number 3 is an equation using the distributive property. Again, following my step, clear equation of fractions and or decimals does not apply. Clear equation of parentheses, which I do have here. So I'm going to do my distributive property. I'm going to multiply negative 8 times 2x, which gives me negative 16x. And I'm going to multiply negative 8 times negative 1, which gives me plus 8. Then I have equals 36. Step 3 would be combine like terms on each side. Does not apply here. Step 4, undo any addition or subtraction. I'm going to undo my plus 8 by minusing 8. And I get negative 16x equals 28. I'm going to undo negative 16 times x by dividing by negative 16. And I get x equals if you put that in your calculator, you're going to get a decimal. Use your math key to change it to a fraction, and we get -7/4. So x equals -7/4. Problem 4 says solving an equation that contains fractions. Following my steps. Step 1, clear equation of fractions. I have two fractions here, one with a denominator of 4, one with a denominator of 3. So you want to multiply equation by a common denominator. So if I look here, I have a denominator of 4 and a denominator of 3. 4 and 3 are both factors of 12, so that means 12 would be a common denominator. So that means I'm going to multiply this side of the equation by 12 and this side of the equation by 12. So if I multiply 12 times 3/4, that gives me 9x. If I multiply 12 times 1/3, that gives me 4x. And I have my minus there, so 9x minus 4x equals, and 12 times 10 is 120. Step 2, no parentheses. Step 3, combine like terms on the same side. So I have my 9x minus 4x, which would give me 5x equals 120. Divide 120 and 5x both by 5. And we get x equals 24. And our last problem, solving an equation that contains decimals. Our first step says to clear equation of fractions and or decimals. You can clear equations of decimals if you want, or you can just leave them and just be sure that you're careful keying in on your calculator. We'll talk in class about how to clear the equation of decimals. Right now, we're just going to straight work this. So if I follow my steps, I have no fractions that I'm going to clear. I have no parentheses, and I have no like terms. So I go straight to step 4, undo any addition or subtraction. I have the 3.5. It's positive, which is the same thing as plus. So that means I'm going to undo it by subtracting 3.5 from both sides. That leaves me with negative 0.02x equals, and if I take 1.24 minus 3.5, I get negative 2.26. Then I'm going to divide both sides by negative 0.02. And I get x equals 113.